Welcome back, parents. Thank you for joining us again. So last time on our Tools for Parents seminar, we ended with talking about modeling avoidance and how that's something that can really lead into addictive behavior. So we're going to pick up where we left off, and we're going to share a little bit more and talk about how we have all of these neurotransmitters, these brain chemicals coursing through our bodies, and what they can lead to in terms of addictive behavior. So imagine with me how some trends can play out. Yes, avoid and run rampant. It can lead to addictive tendencies in a variety of areas. But did you know that all of us are made to crave? There's potential for addiction based simply on the chemicals that are released in our brains and our guts during digestion. So think of this with me. Do you ever crave chocolate or salty chips? That rich, velvety texture on your tongue and burst of sweet can make it hard to chew that chocolate without a smile. From the first crisp bite to the last lick of salt off your finger, every crunchy chip can be like music in your mouth. For some, the mere mention of these foods has activated your salivary glands. It's making me drool just talking about it. It could potentially cause your stomach to growl, even though you recently finished a meal. Why does this happen? Well, it's all chemical. Neurotransmitters are like chemical messengers that are coursing through our bodies. Serotonin, this chemical, has a part in so many things, like our mood, how we interact with others, and things that we desire. However, this chemical is mostly produced in the gut, about 90% of it. This desire button, as I call it, is why serotonin plays a role in our food choices. Endorphin, let's look at this word. So it consists of two parts, endo and orphin. These are short forms for the word endogenous and morphine, a morphine-like substance that originates from within the body. We can think of morphine and its family of drug substances as relieving pain and being highly addictive. Yet our brains create their own chemicals that release these feel-good hormones. Exercise and eating food, particularly the chocolate, are shown to release endorphins. We dive deeper into the craving and brain chemicals in our nutrition and fitness student course of Choose Health, but for the sake of time here and just to give you an introduction, we wanted to cover a couple. Our goal is to open our eyes to see that our brains produce these different chemicals for our good, for pleasure, to protect us during stress, and to cause us to crave good things. Craving is right and healthy. It's what we do with it and the emotions that we manage with it that we need to choose. God made us to crave. Nutrition is a booming industry in the US, and it's seeing consistent growth. This likely means that our kids are exposed to a lot more information about nutrition in comparison to what we all grew up with. So I'm sure that a lot of you as parents can say that you have your kids taking a vitamin and mineral supplement, right? But who's explained the value of getting lots of fruits and vegetables, or the basics of balancing different nutrients, the classes of nutrients, like getting enough protein, carbs, fats, etc. Maybe some of you have even downloaded an app to help you track all this. Yet I'm imagining that you're like me, that more and more of us are putting our time and our resources towards nutrition. Okay, again, a show of hands. Who has explained to their children that dopamine is released in their brains when they eat certain high-calorie foods? Or that it also triggers the release of leptin and ghrelin in their gut, and that they release these chemicals, and it's actually intended to cause us to associate pleasure with food? None of you? Well, I didn't either. I didn't know it. But it's okay because you're in good company. Most of us didn't realize it, so what I'm going to have you do is watch this quick video. It's an example to better understand what to do with a body that's made to crave. So yes, that's a fun way of showing some emerging research. I hope you see now how much our brain and gut chemicals play a huge part in our digestion. I really place enormous value on teaching our kids about getting balanced nutrients. In fact, one of the research projects available in the nutrition and fitness section of Choose Health student curriculum shows kids how we can prevent chronic and degenerative diseases with the foods that we eat. However, our goal with this information that we showed in the video is to help gain a broader understanding on how our brains have a part to play in our digestion and food choices. Hopefully you feel like you have some tools to help you and your kids to understand that it's far beyond the theory of just calories in versus calories burned. The one thing that I will point out is that in our last video, we spent a good chunk of time talking about the importance of writing, modeling, and practicing choosing health and how we manage challenges. Well, the same holds true for our food choices. If eating a dinner of lean proteins and a variety of veggies is what you do as a family, well, then it stands to reason that it would catch on. I know, I've heard from so many parents that your strong-willed child refuses to eat anything but chips and hot dogs. Well, if we believe all the research that our brain chemicals play a part in our food choices and digestion, then it makes sense to trust that our kids have within their DNA, the will to thrive. They are not going to let themselves starve. If you want some practical tools and how to help your kids get a more balanced and nutritious diet, then in your handout, I provided some links that you can go to for some ideas with that. So the craving that we talked about with the chocolate or chips can slowly take a turn. We can wonder as parents, how does that even start? How do I stop the poor choices from becoming bad habits? My honest answer is none of us can really pinpoint to an exact date or incident, but here are some things that we can learn from research. So a study published by the American Journal of Public Health showed a direct link between a young child who shows lack in non-cognitive abilities to predict the choices in young adult years that would lead to obesity, substance use, and committing crimes. So basically, in plain English, what that means is that a kindergartner that has a tough time with self-control or lacks problem-solving skills has a much higher risk of poor health choices, including substance use leading to addiction. On the flip side, kids who learn the healthy skills that we spoke about, all those examples of the different coping skills, those are what researchers call protective factors. Basically applying these tools to teach our children the healthy coping skills like the positive self-talk and putting them in the driver's seat to evaluate their choices, it's not only going to affect their emotional health right now, but it's going to greatly reduce their risk factors for substance use in the future. We're going to elaborate on some common risk factors next. As you're following along in your handout, that's going to be on page 7. Before I do that, I want to point out that I've provided a link for you to this study that I cited in the resources section of your handout. So that way you can read the details of the report. It's quite interesting. I'm not a psychologist, nor would I claim to be an expert in research on these subjects. However, I am a parent and I volunteered with kids and at-risk youth since 2003. The most alarming thing to me about these studies was that many of them were citing a test group from 1990 to 2005. What will the result be in a test group that has elevated exposure like we do now? A kindergartner in 1990 could not search their favorite music artist or movie star on YouTube with a swipe of a finger. They sure can today. What needs to happen to a generation before our culture has a revelation that it's our responsibility to affect change? It's my responsibility to choose to be healthy as a living example and to teach my kids to be healthy. Okay, so we're going to move on and discuss a few of those common risk factors and protective factors. As we go through this section, I encourage you to think about your family and what the risk factors and protective factors are that apply to you. So the number one risk factor is witnessing substance use. We already touched on the fact that our kids are bombarded through social media and entertainment, whether it's movies or watching shows online. Everywhere we turn, we can see actors or musicians who are glamorizing substance use. Are your kids buying the hype? If they're around peers or adults who use or abuse substances, it increases their risk to use and it increases their risk for addiction. Our kids are curious and they tend to imitate who they're in relationship with. Who do your kids watch? Number 2, high stress environments are our second risk factor that we're going to talk about. Continuous conflicts at home or with peers lead to feeling overwhelmed. This is where habitually coping through avoidance can pop up and be a problem. Number 3, our last point, is family history. If addiction has been a part of the life of a family member, then they have a higher chance of substance use and addiction. There is value in discussing in general terms the journey of addiction. If you have a family member who feels comfortable sharing their struggle and victory, then have that talk as a family. Next, we're going to move on to protective factors. Peer activities that repeat the no drug policy are a significant protective factor for our kids. Participating on a sports team or a youth group where the coach or leader also talks about steering clear of risky behavior is the kind of reinforcement that we as parents need. I don't think that we can overestimate the value of other healthy adults in our kids' lives. I have heard of other parents with teens that they recognize how important the interaction their child has had over the years with these other families. We need others beating the same drum that we are. Our kids can tune us out. If you recognize that you don't have their ear, then find a healthy adult who does. We need our kids hearing the principles of the Bible at every turn. Number 2, the world can build a distorted image of what it means to add value, almost like these girls that you see in the picture getting a glimpse in a funhouse mirror. Our kids need to be told the truth of who they are early and often. That way, when the world shows them a distorted image, like needing to drink or to do drugs to fit in, then they'll see it for the lie that it is. Kids who are secure in their self-worth are much more likely to walk away from temptation and peer pressure. Number 3, parents and adults who model healthy choices, like grandparents, other family members, teachers, that's a significant protective factor. Setting the example with a healthy diet and exercise is important, but modeling self-control with occasional alcohol consumption could be valuable. If you've chosen sobriety because of a past alcohol addiction, then I'm absolutely not advocating that you jump into having a drink with dinner so that you can model self-control. Use wisdom and go with the best choice for your family. We're next going to move on to page 8 in your handout. So let's talk about marijuana use. After all, several states have passed laws saying that it's legal, and in many cities you can't drive more than a few miles without a dispensary billboard in your face. So why don't the feds just get on board with legalizing marijuana, right? It likely has something to do with the fact that there's overwhelming statistics of harmful effects. Marijuana is still a Schedule I drug according to federal law, despite the bills passed by some states. It's classified as such because the research shows it has high potential for addiction and other health problems. Research shows that about 30% of users can develop a marijuana use disorder. That's their term, but it essentially means dependence. If you think I smoked a little pot back in college, it's not that big of a deal, think again. So on your slide, you can see that there's a dramatic shift that's taking place in the plant over itself in the past few decades. As you can see, the plants are being bred to increase the THC content. This in turn is decreasing the CBD content. Unfortunately, the decrease in the CBD content flies in the face of those who support medical marijuana use. The CBD component of the plant is the portion that researchers say has medicinal benefits. So why is the higher THC content a problem? Exposure to higher THC means a greater chance of a harmful reaction like breathing difficulty, impaired attention, or learning. And that's really just a short list. Research shows that regular exposure to higher doses of THC can lead to a much greater risk for addiction. I find the most disturbing statistic is that regular marijuana users report poor mental health and a lower life satisfaction. It's really no wonder that it's consistently described as a gateway drug. The high clearly leads to lows, so trying the next thing just to feel better again makes sense. Choose Health has the goal of imparting knowledge like the facts and the data we've given you from different studies. However, we want to equip you as parents to work with your kids on skills to avoid risky behavior. How do our kids avoid risky behavior leading to illegal drug, prescription drug, or alcohol use? Tell them not to. I'm not trying to oversimplify. I'm saying that because statistics show that telling our kids early and often about the risks makes them much less likely to initiate use. Remember how we said the number one goal is keeping the dialogue open. You'll notice in your handout that I've given you some role-playing ideas on what I call car conversations. Our kids are just sitting there with their noses in a device, so we can turn it into an opportunity. Face-to-face conversations have value, but sometimes these challenging conversations are so much easier to have without the intensity of eye contact. So this really makes a car ride ideal. You might want to hit some traffic on purpose. As you're having these car conversations with your child, it's really important to listen to what your child is seeing in their peers. Ask them what they are understanding about avoidance and peer pressure. Listen for cues so that they are responding to you, and do they understand what the consequences might be? What are the consequences in your family? The ideas that I have for you aren't necessarily intended to be an exact script. They're ideas to get the car conversation rolling between you and your children. Hopefully you'll have some ideas to just get things started. I wanted to encourage you, the more that you work on this, the easier it will become for both you and your kids. Remember, the number one goal is to keep the dialogue open. This is also an important time to remind your child what the rules and consequences are in your family. I encourage you to also end the conversation, as I've shown you in the script, with some type of gratitude and affirmation. Earlier we spoke about learning to evaluate wise and unwise choices. Hopefully this can become a habit while they are younger. These car conversations are a really good time to talk about their choices and the consequences. As they get older, explain that the consequences for poor choices are more severe. Timeout as a preschooler looks like detention as a high school student. Expulsion as a high school student looks like jail time as an adult. And don't tell the consequences that you're going to kill them, like the threat that we grew up with. It has to be something that you can follow through on. Clearly, none of our parents did. As we end this section on substance abuse, I want to direct your attention to the link in the resources. I've given you a link to a 40-page packet created by the DEA called Growing Up Drug-Free. I highly recommend getting familiar with the contents and even look through it with your kids when it's age appropriate. A very beneficial part is a detailed list with images and a variety of prescription and illegal drugs. It gives you the common street names used for the drugs. Most importantly, it breaks down what the harmful and potentially lethal effects are. Now we're going to move on to the concept of our brains and minds. In order to fully grasp this, what I'm going to ask you to do is to take out your cell phones and turn them on airplane mode for 5 minutes. I know for some of you, you might be thinking, this lady's crazy. There's no way I could do that, be unplugged for 5 minutes. Well, that's somewhat the point of the exercise. So I'll give you a second, go ahead and get your devices on airplane mode and we'll get started. So for the next 5 minutes, what the goal is for everybody to be completely still and quiet. You're welcome to close your eyes, but what I need is for everyone to be completely participating where you're at. Don't shift in your seat, and we're going to set the clock for 5 minutes. So for those here present and for those who are watching online, you can participate. Okay, so 5 minutes. Not as easy as we may have thought, right? The goal with this is not just to make you squirm in your seats. It was to create some awareness of how little our schedules and our culture today encourage time to slow down and just think. If this is a challenge for us as parents, imagine the meltdowns we could see with some of our kids. And I'm not necessarily talking about toddlers here, but our teenagers. To follow along, you can go ahead and turn to page 9 in your handout. Our brief experiment here was based on a study conducted at the University of Virginia. For 15 minutes, the study participants were alone in a lab room. They could be quiet and still, like we just painfully endured, or they could push a button and electrically shock themselves if they wanted to. As opposed to just sitting there and quietly thinking, 67% of men and 25% of women chose to electrically shock themselves. Doing something, though painful, was better than doing nothing. Fear of missing out and therefore being constantly plugged in to being stimulated is dictating our culture, and it's a startling trend. The study was published in Science magazine, and there were some interesting comments about the study. It said, if some people seem to enjoy thinking more than others, for instance, the study found that people who are more agreeable or cooperative are more likely to enjoy themselves, when they were told to think about anything, nothing at all. Individuals who admitted that their daydreams normally leave them happy, they fared better too. So the question is, can you be alone with yourself, just you and your thoughts? Can your children? If there's a group who generally enjoys thinking, then there is a group who generally does not enjoy thinking. In fact, they avoid thinking altogether. Research shows that over 90% of people deal with negative or intrusive thoughts. Intrusive thoughts really need to be managed. Checking out of life and scrolling our feeds is not negative thought management. What is the solution? Dr. Caroline Leaf is a cognitive neuroscientist, and her decades of work and research about the mind-brain connection are well respected in the medical community. However, her style of teaching in books and online talks are dramatically changing the lives of ordinary people and parents everywhere. The solution she recommends is to daily spend at least 16 minutes in thinker mode, titled after the famous Rodin sculpture here. We need to be still and quiet with our thoughts in order to shift and manage the negative or toxic thoughts so commonly avoided, like this. Consider setting an alarm as needed. It can be broken up into two or three intervals during the day. And I encourage you to keep accountable as a family and try to commit to this for at least 30 days. My favorite quote from Dr. Leaf: "You can change your brain with your mind, and by doing so, change your life." She has further details and strategies for managing our thoughts and much more. And this is available on her app, and I have that listed in your resource section. Yes, I see the irony in the fact that she's sending us back to our devices, but this is how we can use them as a help tool instead of just mindless entertainment. In fact, Choose Health's Mind and Emotion student course covers a lot of these strategies. Being plugged in for socializing and learning and entertainment is simply a part of the culture we live in now. But when does it become a habit we can easily become unaware of? We conducted our own small experiment here, not just to see how uncomfortable we can be to sit still and think, but to recognize how often we tend to have our eyes in front of a screen. And some need other senses constantly occupied. Our hands scrolling or typing on a device, our ears wired for sound. What I'm going to have you do next is watch this viral video by Gary Turk titled "Look Up." It's a great example of the effects that being plugged in can have. Really makes you think, right? We need to be aware of what we model for our kids when it comes to balancing time on screens and time spent face to face. God created us for a relationship. When we neglect the time or focus that it takes, then our relationships will not be healthy. Thank you so much, parents, for joining us for this installment of our Tools for Parents seminar. Come back and join us again, because we are going to dive in deeper and talk about all of these neurotransmitters, brain chemicals, and how they play a part in sex. See you next time.